Was trained in Mississippi. They sent us to a radar and radio school. The radar was countermeasures. In other words, we used to fly low over China and throw chaff out to block the radar. You know, there's foil, tin foil stuff, and just throw that out. And the radios we used sparingly. So I really didn't have a big job. Bring food to the pilot, to the crew. I'd go down the cafeteria and get food and help them get the plane's engines. Somebody had to stand out there and protect the engine with a fire extinguisher in case something happened. So it was kind of boring that way. I didn't really have a job like the bombardier or the navigator or the pilot or co-pilot or the flight engineer. So just along for the ride. Yeah. I was in the Air Force, of course. I was stationed in Randolph Field in Texas. And 1952, the Korean War ended. We were in B-29 bombers training to go to Korea. So all of a sudden the war stopped and we sat there for about 3 or 4 months until they figured out what they're going to do with us. Eventually I ended up they went from Texas when they figured out what they're going to do with us. I went to Sacramento to the RC-121 Air Force planes. And then from there they shipped me to Okinawa. And I got on B-29 crew there. And the only Korean experience I have is that we used to fly over the runway, usually at night, and drop, supplies and armament and whatever. We never knew what they had in the bomb bay. They just had it all crated up and bombs away. We weren't dropping bombs, we were dropping military things and supplies and whatever. So I never got on the ground in Korea. I flew over 2 or 3 times doing our mission at night. So that's about my only Korean experience. So I wasn't actually in any active war there. But I would have been if the war had gone on much beyond June of that year, 52. I'd have been over there. And the B-29s are terrible, slow planes compared to the MiGs that the Chinese had. The B-29s were probably flying at 250 miles an hour at the most, and the MiGs could go 400 or 500 miles an hour, so they just shot us to pieces, It was terrible. So I got lucky. And they were just shooting these slow B-29s out of the air, just slaughter. So I'm lucky to be here, because I'd have been one of them. We used to go to some of these cliffs where the Japanese guys were jumping off, committing suicide. Yeah, and there were a bunch of caves there where the Americans would go in there with these torches and just fry these Japanese. They were piled up in bone. The bones were piled in some of those caves, because it was a terrible war there on that island. It's a lot of miserable fighting. Yeah. That's an experience. We used to go all over the Far East. We were stationed in Okinawa, but I got to see a lot of different places. We went to Thailand, went to Pakistan, went to Vietnam, to Hong Kong, the Philippines, Guam, Tinian, all those places. I guess seeing these different countries and doing a lot of shopping. You go to Thailand, to Bangkok, they had silk and jewelry and all kinds of things, and I'd spend my time just going around the shops. So it was like a shopping spree. That was the only fun side of it. We had, at one point in time, we were flying unmarked planes. Nobody knew who we were. We'd wear civilian clothes when we get off the planes, and everybody looking at us and saying, well, who are they? Here's a big old B-29 with no name on it, nothing. But we did that purposely. We carried a gun, a pistol, if we ever got shot down, because we were doing some crazy things over there, snooping around, you know,
Yeah.
with the planes. But that was the only thing. You got to see a lot of different countries. That was the good side. Well, the B-29s, we were refueled in Hickam Field, which is in Hawaii on the mainland, and we'd fly from there to Travis Air Force Base in Fairfield, California. It's about a 5-hour flight, something like that. And so this last trip around, we took off, and the landing gear on the right-hand side, they had retractable landing gears that go up into the engine compartment. And the landing gear got stuck about 3/4 of the way down. So the captain sent me down to the Bombay, because I knew what to do. He said, go down and crank it down manually. So I went down to the Bombay and I'm cranking. I said, Captain, this isn't working. It doesn't engage. And he said, oh boy. So we're going to have to crash land then, because they wouldn't let us fly to Travis Air Force Base. So we dumped all our fuel. We flew over Waikiki Beach for a couple of hours, dumping fuel, you know. We did have a chance to bail out when we were burning fuel. The captain says, okay, anybody wants to bail out? We had two parachutes. We had one in the chest, it's called a chest pack. You rip it this way, or the main chute, which you pull down this way. So he said, open the rear door. There was a side door there. And let me know who's going to be bailing out. So we all look at each other, and some of these guys used to brag a lot, you know, say, if I ever have to bail out this sucker, I'm going to do it. Well, guess what? We looked down in the bay, and I could just imagine the sharks swimming around down there. They never bailed out, never used a parachute before. You have to count on that. So we all sat tight and said, we're going to ride it down. We're not going to bail out. So, and in the meantime, they greased the runway for us. And we lost 2 engines. One engine shortly after we took off. We lost another engine maybe an hour or so later. So now we're on 2 engines. And the planes can fly on 2 engines, but not for too long, because they get too much of a load on them and they heat up and burn up. So when we came down and crash landed, we didn't have any landing gear on the right-hand side. So the pilot kept the plane up, the wing high on that side, on the right side, until it finally came down. And then when it came down, it hit the runway, and we spun them across 2 or 3 runways and stopped. There's no fire. Everybody jumped out of the planes, and I jumped out. The dumb thing I did, made a mistake of what I did, jumping off the high side of the plane, and it broke my ankle. I was the only casualty, and so we came back to the States, and they gave me a couple weeks off to recuperate. I had a big old cast on my foot, so that was my war experience. They tried to keep me in the service, RIA, as they called it, and I wanted to get out. I had 4 years, and that was enough for me. So I made staff sergeant. They said if I had to re-up, that'd be a technical sergeant, which is, you know, quite a few stripes. But that didn't entice me, because I was determined to get out and make a career somewhere, and ended up where I ended up in the architectural school. It was kind of tough because I was married. I just got married in '53, And I was over there in 1954, 55. Those were some long days, being away from family, because I'd be gone for 3 or 4 months at a time before I'd catch one of these flights back here. But I made it, survived. My wife was working for a doctor in Sonoma, and she used to write letters. We'd write letters every day to each other, I was over there for 18 months. So it's a good thing to get back home.